right, so if you have any issues with the Lab Pro units, these things here, they typically work fine. Sometimes they need rebooted, but let's say you're having issues. A couple things I want to mention. Sometimes these CO2 probes will not calibrate. So first of all, always make sure they're set, I'm trying to get it to focus here, set to low, so that switch right here is in the low position, the down position. Okay, that's step one. Step two is sometimes they will not calibrate, but they'll still read and work okay. And that's okay, because what we're getting here is the slope, the rate of change over time. So if they won't calibrate, but they still read CO2 levels, that's fine. It's when they don't read CO2 levels that we have to retire them. And so please be careful with these probes. They are quite expensive, but if they're not working, put them in the prep room under the window in a pile there, so I know that I need to look at them. All right, so let's say you're having issues with the computer. Just in case that would happen, we do have these LabQuest units which are available in the lab, and what you do is you plug the CO2 probe into channel 1 on the side here, so right there. Forgive me, I'm filming while I'm doing this, and it will read. And these probes typically need to be calibrated if they're going to read room CO2 levels using the button on the side. I'm going to plug the O2 probe in as well. And we can see these are reading in different units. And that's okay, but you can change these units simply by tapping on CO2, oxygen gas, and going to change units, and going to, in this case, I can go to parts per million, which is really high for oxygen, since oxygen is much more abundant in the atmosphere. Notice the CO2 levels are rising as this probe warms up, and eventually I could even use the stylus on this device and carefully press this calibrate button. The calibrate button you'll know is working when this light flashes, and then this number will jump to around 400 parts per million. Once again, the probe can work for our lab without being calibrated because it's the change over time that we're interested in more so than the absolute value. But I'm going to go ahead, probably have a heck of a time filming this. I'm going to go ahead and press the calibrate button here. Hold on a minute, this is too hard to do while I'm filming. All right, I press the button, and then this jumps up to around 400 parts per million or so. So this thing's working now. So what I'm going to do, just as a demo, is I'm going to put some beans in one of these containers, and we're going to see how they respire. Meanwhile, I will point out, if you have a lab where CO2 probes are not working, maybe you have a table, maybe you have 5 CO2 probes and 6 tables because one of them has quit working, then that table could just do an oxygen sensor. We can do that as well and still get good data. After 5 minutes, I'm going to go ahead and highlight basically half of the data here, because it looks like oxygen levels kind of bottom out there. So I want to make sure to include some of the values over here where we have a linear change. I'm going to go to Analyze and Curve Fit, and then I choose CO2, and then I have to choose Linear Fit, and then it gives me my slope. So that's our data. That's parts per million CO2 per minute in this case. So I can click OK there. I can do the same thing for oxygen. Linear fit. And there we have a change in oxygen. Now maybe I should have, for oxygen, not included this plateau. But anyway, I just wanted to show you how this worked. Another thing I want to show you real quick is if you are using one of these units and it's reading in seconds instead of minutes, you can simply, actually let me just go to File New. Let me do a new one here. Alright, so here we are. I can simply go to duration, and I can change it to 5 minutes, and I want to make sure it's doing about 15 or so samples per minute. Done. And now when I record, it'll be a minute-based scale instead. You can see how much CO2 these beans are putting off. I started, we were about 400 parts per million. Now we're at 4,000 parts per million. That's pretty impressive. Anyway, that's how these probes work. Meanwhile, the other thing we'll have going on in lab is on the ring stands we'll have a light bulb, which you can leave on the ring stand and lower down to what I often do is set these like this and put the bulb right on top. That's one way to do it, or the bulb can be sitting on the table and shining directly into the container. But I would basically touch the bulb to the container to ensure that the distance is correct. So you'll have a color filter and the bulb kind of sandwiching the color filter to the respiration chamber.